Are rebellious generals causing the Russian Ministry of Defense to go into crisis mode? Just how bad is it when your Wagner officers and many of your MOD are outright criticizing and rebelling? Plus, is Ukraine continuing its advance around Bakhmut, and have they reached a critical point in the south? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's July 14th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, let's take a look at the control map, right? There's some significant-ish changes. You can see here, this is depicting Ukrainian forces having officially liberated this area north of Robotine, generally just reflecting a consolidation of control. But what I think is actually more significant, we'll talk about in a sec, the other significant change, right? You can see again, there's some areas that were liberated more than 2 weeks ago that are being designated on the map. But the real change is when we look north towards Bakhmut, you can see that this is a very significant retreat by Russian forces, or at least a substantial amount of territory, I should say. Ukrainian forces are pushing and controlling critically this windbreak here, which forms a really good trench line, effectively, or physical barrier that can be used to establish good defensive positions. So one, it's good that Russian forces are forced out of it and Ukrainian forces are into it. You can see that this is largely open terrain, a little bit mountainous, until you get to the actual city of Andriivka and the windbreaks along the rail line here. That's really the next major obstacle. So Russian forces probably digging in and around Andriivka, but it looks like they are probably intentionally withdrawing from this tree line here, right? Falling back to not just, falling back from this defensive tree line, falling back all the way, likely they're conducting a fighting retreat and will really try to hold Ukrainian forces here at Andriivka. But momentum definitely seems to be increasingly favoring Ukrainian forces in this fight in and around Bakhmut. You can see again, as we've talked about, Russian forces just not able to really establish strong defensive positions like we'd been seeing previously. You can see here, this is about as strong a defensive position as you see. And this is around a kilometer-long trench line, but it's not really part of any larger defensive network in and around Bakhmut. So I think this is indicative to me that Russian forces have not established the really strong defensive lines that we've seen in Zaporizhzhia. But when we go over to War Mapper, he's reporting that outside of Robotine, you can see that this is somewhat more recent. This is only, I think, less than 24 hours old. It depicts Ukrainian forces as having surged and liberated this, you can see it, chunk of the Russian trench line that sort of exists all along here. This has probably been an important part of Russia's defense of Robotine. So being able to flip this trench formation is pretty significant because, again, when you control this area, this entire trench line no longer serves its original defensive purpose, which is, of course, confronting Ukrainian forces approaching from the north. Suddenly, you have Ukrainian forces to your west, and for Russians in this formation, it's a really tough spot to be. Now, you can obviously see that there are a bunch of other small defensive structures running east-west along this highway, T-84, outside of Robotine, but the deepest, strongest defensive structures have just been liberated by Ukraine. So I think this may actually bode well for the next 48 hours or so, especially vis-a-vis Ukraine's ability to push and force the Russian forces that are occupying these trench lines to fall back to secondary positions. Again, Ukraine doesn't seem to be trying to achieve major breakthroughs at this point, so I think it's unlikely that we're going to see this turn into a big sweeping offensive, but it would be, again, a good opportunity for them to carve off more territory at relatively low cost because of just how less effective Russia's existing fortification systems are. Now, Before I get into that, today is Friday, which means we are dropping another video on combatvetnews.com. If you want to support what I do, certainly YouTube sponsors have shied away from this content. But if you believe in this analysis, if you believe in what I do, I would really appreciate your support. Every single Friday and most Wednesdays, I'm trying to drop a new exclusive video covering the viral combat footage that YouTube won't let me show you, Patreon won't let me show you, but it lets us see just what is going on the front lines, right? It's something that no amount of analysis or spin can change, is gaining this understanding of what exactly is happening. And the only place I can do it is, of course, on combatvetnews.com. So it's exclusive for members only. Any one of these membership tiers is going to get you access to it. Of course, if you want to be a true supporter, you can join at the lieutenant tier, get a shout out at the end of videos, or, of course, the supremely generous colonel tier who get the gold-plated shout outs at the end of the videos. Anyway, be sure to check it out. Links in the description or up there. Okay, let's talk about Russia and its rebellious generals. More information has come out about the General Popov, who was recently sacked by Shoigu. What's very fascinating is that Popov referred to himself by his call sign, Spartak, which is, of course, a reference to Spartacus. This is the Roman slave rebellion leader. Remember famously, I am Spartacus. This is someone who led a rebellion of slaves against the Roman military, defeating them on numerous occasions. And he referred to his subordinates. He refers to his subordinates as gladiators. So already there is a sense within the general himself that he and his soldiers are not respected by their institution and view themselves as, in many ways, men or soldiers apart from the MOD. Of course, he deliberately evoked this call sign to underscore himself as, of course, separate from the inept and actively harmful Russian military command. All right. And of course, describing Gerasimov as attacking Russian forces from the rear as they defend against the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And he painted himself as morally obligated to raise his concerns with the Russian MOD command. But again, whether intentional or otherwise, the Institute for the Study of War points out, this is very reminiscent of Prigozhin's portrayal of himself leading up to his armed rebellion. But Popov is not known to be affiliated directly with Wagner or Prigozhin. However, when Popov leaked what was his recording, it was almost certain that it would not stay in the private Telegram group he posted it in. But he just wanted to maintain plausible deniability when it did become public. Right? Some voices in the Russian ultranationalist community criticized the blogger who broke this story, saying that it was clearly a private information and not meant to be publicly shared. But again, distributing an audio with your own voice straight into this chat means that it's probably meant to be leaked, right? Especially an experienced Russian general is going to understand. OPSEC, certainly. Right? And some sources, a Russian source actually said that his grievances and reports of his dismissal were prior to the leak of the recording, which suggests Popov may have coordinated the timing of the leak around his firing. Right? And Popov, again, probably aligning himself with Wagner intentionally or unintentionally, given that he requested that the Kremlin partially or fully strip Gerasimov of command over operations in Ukraine. Right? There are a lot of rumors that ISW is reporting about, again, that we sort of talked about, that Gerasimov may be less active in command. He may have had large portions of his actual authority stripped from him, and that Teplinsky is now responsible for operations in Ukraine, even though ISW reports that this is just rumored, right? An unofficial change of policy. But again, I think this all reflects a larger purging of officers from the MOD that sort of aligns with Wagner's stated goals. Right? When we look at some of the recent news stories, we can also see, let's see if we can find it here. I just had it up. So this is way in here. Here we go. Wagner mercenaries train soldiers in Belarus. This is also the latest on Wagner, who have relocated to Belarus and are beginning to act as instructors in a number of military disciplines. This occurs concurrently with the withdrawal from Belarus of Russian forces. So what I suspect is that some of these support functions that Russian MOD forces were doing in Belarus have now been replaced with Wagner forces. So Wagner forces get to bring their combat-proven tactics to Belarus, and in turn, active duty Russian military can be sent to the front lines. I think this is probably what was a core part of this deal. But because Wagner has relocated, there's also a bunch of rumors that from the Pentagon that Wagner is no longer really seen as a combat force in Ukraine. This is, again, almost certainly part of the deal that was brokered. And of course, finally, there's been stories covered by the Wall Street Journal alleging that Russian authorities immediately after the Prigozhin's coup detained 13 military officers and dismissed 15 more, including General Sergei Sotovikin, who, again, you may recall, is a very, very pro-Wagner officer. And he hasn't been seen publicly since the day of the revolt, but he did come out publicly and encourage Prigozhin to stop shortly after the revolt occurred. And so this is probably, this would align with the fact that there are some rumors that Prigozhin expected more support from his military, from senior military officers, and that it never really came, even though a lot of the rank and file never really bothered to resist Wagner in any substantive way. So I think this is indicative, again, that really at the Kremlin, there is a tremendous fear of increasingly empowered rebellious generals who, after having seen the fact that Prigozhin blatantly criticized the MOD, absolutely refused to take orders, and then staged a coup on Moscow and was simply told to turn around and go home, has really empowered these other officers to be more open with their criticism of the way the war is being run. Certainly, it seems justified. Anyway, guys, thank you so much to our Colonel tier members and, of course, all of our Lieutenant tier members. I appreciate so much what you guys do. You really are the ones who enable me to do this every single day. And I will see you guys over at combatvetnews.com. Cheers.